What was the reason you ended your last job? The company didn't offer bereavement days. I called off to go to my father's funeral, and my manager told me it was inconvenient for them to have to cover my shift because they were short-staffed and that I needed to come to work. I told them I wasn't missing my father's funeral for their measly $11 an hour. They fired me the next day. Story 2. I asked for a raise when I realized my job was about 5 positions in one. When my boss tried to get my raise approved, she was denied. She told the big bosses that I would walk if this wasn't approved, and they literally said, "Oh well." I got my dream job the following week. Story 3. Started a job as security for a gate at a nuclear power plant. Enjoyed it. Was working 40 hours a week. Showed up every day. Didn't complain. Then they fire 3 people for no reason and make me start working 80 hours a week mandatory. I was making tons of money but was struggling to find time to buy groceries since I worked until late at night. Boss starts micromanaging every little thing while I'm working 16 HR days. Then they wanted me to start training people, said I'd get a $2 an hour raise for doing it. That never happened. Then I had some car issues, and I couldn't come in one day. I had to go to AutoZone and buy a replacement part. I got the problem solved and was good to go the next day. I never missed a day in 6 months. My boss called every car shop in town, allegedly, and said that I was lying. I bring the part that I replaced in to show her. She says that's not enough proof and that no one in town said they sold me that part. She wrote me up and then said I might be fired or I might not, and I'll know at the end of the week. I said okay, and she asked me if I was coming in tomorrow morning, and I said sure. Next day I slept in and never showed up. Apparently there were trucks backed all the way up the road for 4 hours since I didn't show up to open the gate. Boss texts me saying I'll be criminally charged for not showing. I just ignored it, so she called me every day for about a week. I never answered. Found out later that she went on a power trip and fired the people I trained because I taught them wrong, then replaced them with her relatives. This is the person guarding your energy infrastructure, America. Story 4. Change in management. First day on the job, new manager said, "What is it that you do all day? Because nothing ever seems to get done." Should have taken the 6 weeks of holidays that I was owed that day, but didn't. Within a year of my finally leaving, I was replaced by 4 people. Story 5. I told a regular customer who always acts like an idiot exactly what I thought of him. Unfortunately, it turns out he is an investor in that business. I was sick of that job anyway. Just got a higher paid one closer to my house. I actually saw him today. As soon as he saw me, he scuttled off to drink somewhere else. Story 6. HVAC installer here. I quit my last job because our scheduler decided she didn't like me, so when I'd message her to get the address of my next job, she wouldn't respond. I had to call another office staffer to ask if she was in. She was, and asked to be transferred. She picked up and hung up immediately. I called staffer again, asked to be transferred. Again, she hung up. Again. This was a Friday. I went home, cleaned the work van of my tools, dropped the van off at the office, keys inside, went home and emailed the boss a letter explaining why I was quitting, where the van was, and that he could mail me my final check. He called me Saturday morning asking what it would take to get me back. I told him he'd have to fire the scheduler, his wife. He said he could never do that. I told him I already knew that and had a job lined up for Monday morning. In between getting home and returning the work van, I sent my resume out to 5 different HVAC companies. In the 3 hours it took to clean out and return the van, I had 5 offers. Story 7. I was teaching high school social studies, had a difficult heart episode, had previous heart attack, and my friends at school who visited every day in the ICU convinced me it was time to retire. That was 4 years ago. They were right. I love being retired. Story 8. I was paid at a daily rate as truck driver. I was happy with that rate. I wasn't a truck driver. I was the director of transportation. The GM had mentored me and trained me to handle all aspects of the transportation division. He planned on leaving, and for the current director to take his place. I was to be the new director. The GM left, and the same week that the director moved into his position, he was fired for doing a lot of shady crap. So here I am running crap by myself on the payroll as a truck driver. The president of the company brought in a friend of his from his previous company and made him the GM. This guy had no clue about anything shipping and no clue about the crazy, evolved over 70 years from scratch, homegrown system we had. So I'm handling both positions so that his buddy can get a free salary. Meanwhile, they decided that the director position would start out at $60K a year, which was less than half what I made as a driver or trainer. I politely declined the position under those circumstances, but said I would be happy to accept it if they would keep my pay as it was. This is what the previous GM had agreed to. We would end up having this same discussion every 6 months or so. They kept trying to force me to take the title and a salary that was half my yearly normal. I kept refusing. They would hire someone from outside the company. I would train them. It would never work out. They would usually quit because they couldn't deal with the hobbled-together, rigged-up system we had. The others would get fired for ducking crap all the way up. This went on for years. like 7 or 8 years and 7 or 8 people they hired. I might drive 4 days out of the year. The rest of the time, I was acting as the director or training a director. After 8 years of this, I said, "Duck it," and turned in a written notice saying they had 6 months to either formalize my position and pay or put me back in a truck and leave me the hell alone. It had my last day on it more than once. I sent it both by email and interoffice mail to the transportation GM, director of HR, warehouse GM, and the company president. These same people I've been in meetings with once or twice a week for 7 years, mind you. I sent a reminder at 3 months, 1 month, and 2 weeks. Nobody busted a move. That day marked my 20E with the company, and I left. Best decision I ever made. That was 6 years ago, and they still haven't got their crap right. I still do business with them. I bought a couple trucks and started my own trucking company. 80% of my business is hauling that company's loads. I make a ton more than I did as their employee. I work half as much, and I deal with 0 Bs at all. Story 9. My husband was hospitalized for a lot of issues. One day he collapsed and we found out he was diabetic, had a stroke, was in heart failure, and had multiple infections in his blood. He had had a valve replacement year back, and somehow it had gone moldy inside him, probably due to his sugars being uncontrolled for years, causing all the other problems. We have young twins and I was balancing them, visiting my husband in hospital to talk to doctors, and working full-time. I told Hashara what had happened very early on and burst into tears saying I was terrified of getting fired. They assured me that wouldn't happen, and they're there to help. During the 3 months my husband was in critical care, HR told me I could always purchase leave from the company if I was struggling, but when I said I couldn't afford that, now that I was supporting the bills essentially alone, they had no further suggestions or advice. Literally fought with the hospital social worker when they requested my luxurious 3 days of compassionate leave. The social worker literally came back into the room, fuming, saying my work sucked, because they kept trying to get her to say my husband wasn't at risk of dying, so I didn't actually need or qualify for the 3 days. I was working remotely from his hospital room to make my hours. On the day of his surgery, I logged on late, worked till 6, went to ICU to sit by him while he came out of anesthesia till 1 a.m., slept in a chair by his bed, then left at 6 a.m. to be ready for work by 8. Before my husband was even released, my boss and I had a meeting where she said my actions had been hurting my supervisor's feelings. They didn't feel like I was working hard enough, and I needed to apologize because they were feeling hard done by. Apparently, my colleagues felt it was unfair that they had to do some of my work to lighten the load, while doctors discussed how I may be taken care of financially if my husband passed. Reminder, I was 29 with 2-year-old twins, and I was still working 8-5 most days. My boss then told me if I couldn't handle the job, she'd find someone who could. I said, just to clarify, HR told me they couldn't and wouldn't fire me because of my husband being in critical condition in hospital, but you're saying despite that you will. And she said, I don't know specifics, but I'm more than happy to look into it, yes. It's been 7 months. My husband is fine now, but I don't think I will ever get over that. When I told HR there was an issue with my former boss, they said, oh, we don't need to talk about that, and didn't communicate with me again. Oh, and that boss got a prominent promotion a few months back. Yay, I had a new job by the next week. After that convo story 10, my last employer of 32 years had shrunk from 3,000 employees to $200. I'd earned above average reviews for many years. Then my boss gave me a below average one. That was the writing on the wall for me. Things were getting worse and worse. Crappy attitudes all around. I just got fed up, gave my 2 weeks notice. I told them for years that they'd miss me when I was gone. Well, I left. They started calling, asking me to come back. Sorry, I'm retired. Story 11. I left my last job as a tech PM after 13 months because the owners, let's call them L&J, consistently treated their employees as fodder through manipulation, overworking, blatant disregard for mental health, and baseless threats. I had a development manager from Egypt, I'll call him Y, who had a mental crisis, which the team informed me Egyptians are not allowed to have or discuss in their country, and he was hospitalized. We refer to it as institutionalized here. He was a good person who should have never been pushed to that point, and I didn't know it was occurring until he was gone. L&J, knowing that Y tried to commit, died because he felt like he'd let people down with his work, a sentiment that L&J kept assaulting him and his team with, continued to abuse the rest of the developers the same way, and they all were adversely affected, like Y. I managed the dev team on the company projects, and we had an extremely tight bond. I reinforced daily that each dev mattered, especially after Y. So when L&J would lie to the devs that I was going to quit because that the devs' work was crap and various other threatening tactics, I would receive sporadic, hesitant messages from the devs questioning my loyalty to them. There were so many slacks and calls with devs in order to check on their mental health, support them, and refute bullcrap attacks against the team and me. The devs were burnt out, depressed, and wholly alienated at the end of my time there. So was I, but I was very frank with the devs that this was not an environment they deserved. I don't support groupthink, and I know that my statements were unprofessional as a manager, but the devs were more important. I lambasted L&J with a diatribe over how they don't follow their own company edicts surrounding integrity and building relationships that last, and was blown off. Thank you for your well-written email. Ultimately, I left because I had no influence over the Machiavellian owner's bullcrap or protecting the developers. This was just one wretched reason among many, but it was the most damaging, and I couldn't be complicit in their abuse by staying. L&J told the team that I quit because of the developers and my failing health. The dev team, save 3, quit after I left. Y was released a couple of months ago from his hospitalization. Story 12 was head chef at a busy pub, music venue. Had been there 3 years, the previous year of which was under a new owner. It was her first time owning a business, and she was eager, but not quite cut out for it. She and I were good friends, so it was a happy job even if I was having to pick up the pieces for her a lot. She decided to sell the place, but hadn't found buyers yet. But once she made the decision, she went wild trying to cut costs everywhere to get out with as much money as she could have. So she slashed my menu to pieces. All the work I'd put in creating unique dishes that people loved was gone in a day, replaced with the most basic pub fare. I thought she'd totally lost the plot and resigned when she told me she was certain about the changes. She sold the place a month later, and when I got that news, it suddenly made sense. It was still an idiot move, but at least it had a flavor of logic to it and wasn't just complete disrespect for me with no rationale. She and I have talked and hung out since then, so we're back to being friends. And ultimately, leaving that job made me realize just how much stress I was under there. I took a nice, easy job where I don't have to manage anything, and I'm way happier for it. Story 13, lack of communication and direction. I worked for a company that made animatronics for theme parks and museums as a control specialist. My job dealt with the electrical motors programming side of things. Most of my time there, I was given no instruction on what I should be doing. There was no, well, this looks like it needs done, between me being there only a few months and the nature of the business. And I'd try to seek out my boss, but he was seldom to be found. Everyone there joked he would disappear into the cat dimension because he would literally be nowhere, then suddenly walk around a corner. The final straw was a project that had been in our shop for weeks. The frame being built, motors, actuators added to the frame, then the shell added on top of all of that. Weeks I could have gotten a heads up, hey, once X task is done, we need you to make sure it'll move. Nope. I get a text from 2 people on the art fabrication side one morning saying, hey, we need this guy to move today so he can go to paint tomorrow. I had never used the Drive software in my life and don't have a whole lot of programming experience to try to wing it. So I was on the phone with the company that sold us the parts to walk me through it all. It didn't move that day because they sold us the wrong size drive. Fast forward, they sent us the correct drive, and I told my boss we needed a 24A power supply. He said we had a 24V power supply. I said, no, that one's 10A. He said to hook it up and try it anyways. I'm not an electrician, but I know enough that if you need 24 amps, you need 24 amps. 10 amps would be like a child trying to lift an adult on a teeter-totter. So I called my old job during my lunch break, and they welcomed me back with open arms. I don't regret my short stint there. It was my absolute dream job when I graduated the college, and I'm glad to have gotten the opportunity. If I had gotten the job right out of college, I may have stayed and still be there today. But I got a job at a pretty good place after college instead, with good communication, comparatively, and benefits, so I was spoiled. Story 14. Boss reduced employee salaries 30%, all but his wife and kid, who also worked for the company. That was after taking his extended family on a 12-day vacation. Story 15. Started a new job at the competitor of my previous employer after a change in management. Started work and literally was on damage control for vehicles that have been in the shop for 8 months, and no one had a clue what was going on with them. Me and my fiance were expecting a baby at the time, and it was still 4 months until the due date, so me being mindful of the situation, I asked in advance if when the baby came, I could take 2 weeks off to get situated with the baby. The manager said, I can try to give you a week. That was the second red flag. A couple weeks later, I got sick. I've been having issues with my tonsils swelling every few months to the point that it's hard to breathe and I cannot talk. Went to the doctor and they prescribed meds and gave me a 3-day doctor's note. After 3 days, there was no change in my condition, so I called my doctor and they prescribed me different meds and pushed out my return date to the beginning of next week. Monday comes around and I still cannot talk, but I decided to try to go to work anyways. On the way to work, I must have been having some delayed reaction to the antibiotics that were prescribed because I had to stop to vomit multiple times on my commute and when I made it to work. I go straight to my manager after leaving the bathroom and let him know what's going on, and the only thing he says is, I can't believe you're making me short-staffed again, and you better return with another doctor's note. He had no empathy at all for the situation, so While I waited at the doctor, I applied for a job a friend had been begging me to apply to because how great of a company it is. I got called within 2 hours of applying and started a few weeks later. My friend was right. It is an amazing company to work for. Story 16. Nearly lost my nose to frostbite after working in minus 80 degrees with wind chill. When the day was done, I got to go back to camp. They refused to evacuate the work camp in minus 60 degrees, cold snap when we lost power, and with it heat. We had to sleep in minus 30 degrees with a thin blanket and whatever clothes we had in the closet. I fell asleep prior to the power outage, so I never had the opportunity to put on anything and I was fecked. It was minus 63 degrees outside the camp. The warmest it got was minus 49 degrees. No lights, nothing, just cold and darkness. Looked like something out of The Walking Dead. Told the camp manager if it ever happened again, I was going to take apart furniture and burn it for warmth. Story 17. The other esthetician constantly left the room. Products, brushes, etc. Absolutely disgusting. All brushes and products should be sanitized and wiped down after every single client. She would also come in blasted off of whatever pills she decided to take that day. Police followed her once. Boss wouldn't fire her BC. She didn't want to get audited again by the IRS since she committed tax fraud during pandemic. Not losing my license over a trash can of a spa and incompetence. Story 18. It's a long story, but I'll try to keep it short. I had been having a long, hard struggle with endometriosis for a while, and it came to a point where either I get a hysterectomy or get another repeat procedure in hopes of controlling the endometriosis again. After much hesitation, I made the fearful decision to get a hysterectomy. I knew kids were not in my future, and everybody had been saying, if you aren't actively trying to have children, what are you waiting for? The doctor gets in there and sees just how out of control the endometriosis had gotten again, and had to do extra procedures to remove the scar tissue. As such, it caused me to have a hyperinflammatory response to the point where it not only shut down my bladder, but my colon too. I had no choice but to pursue a temporary disability. My boss didn't believe me that it was that severe. Before they could contact the doctor's office to investigate my need for the disability, they fired me. I was able to push back, and they reinstated a temporary position for me and allowed me to get the disability as an apology. I took it, knowing at this point I wanted nothing more to do with them. Everyone there was encouraging me to get the procedure done, but when things went south on me for recovery, nobody even bothered to ask how I was doing. I was expected to be able to pick myself up and move on like nothing had happened. Now I'm stuck fighting constant infections and have no hope for my health. Story 19. I worked a second job as a dishwasher for a mom and pop shop. Unfortunately, business became slow during the fall and early winter. The week before the holiday, the owner emailed us saying that the business would close down at the end of January 2023. They didn't make enough money, that's why we closed down. I was pretty sad because I gotten along with everyone, including the owner and his wife. Everyone was very friendly. The owners would always tell me how much they appreciate and how much I'm a hard worker. I would get tips as well. Unlike my full-time job, where the chef nitpicks me over the smallest crap and gives everyone a slap on the wrist for calling out or showing up late. Story 20. My janitorial job was easy enough before, and even going into the pandemic, but once they had to fire another dude for refusing to get vaccinated, they gave me a good portion of his job on top of what I already was doing, and didn't seem to feel like replacing him. I was struggling to keep up. On top of this, I requested off to visit friends for Christmas, and they waited until the last minute to give me a yes or no, making my plane ticket cost a lot more than it needed to. That was kind of my last straw among a bunch of other things. I should add that I had to fight for the right to quarantine during the time when we didn't have a vaccination ready, and people in close contact with pandemic-positive people like myself were being given an automatic recommendation to take a week or so of, I forget the exact number. Their stance was, if I'm not personally testing positive, I would be fired for not showing up. No exceptions. I was just trying to be safe for myself and others. I had to get the state involved to even get them to allow it. In addition to that, my boss had a history of lying, framing people to make them look like they were doing worse than they were. I could name a bunch of others that quit for the same reason. I didn't want to quit. Parts of my job was almost too easy, but she crossed the line a few too many times with me to stay. Story 21. Believe it or not, my last job came to an end in the most unexpected way, due to a series of quirky coincidences involving a rogue Roomba and a runaway office chair race. It all started innocently enough when I accidentally left the office door open while fetching my morning coffee. Unbeknownst to me, the office Roomba decided it was the perfect time to explore the outside world. But that's not all. My colleague had left their desk chair at an angle, creating an unintentional launch pad. As the Roomba ventured into the hallway, it bumped into the chair, setting off a chain reaction that would have made Rube Goldberg proud. The chair shot forward, hitting another chair, which bumped into the water cooler, sending it wobbling precariously. Of course, the water cooler decided to topple at the precise moment the boss walked by, leading to an impromptu indoor waterfall. The whole office erupted into a chorus of laughter as the boss stood there, dripping wet and speechless. It was like a scene out of a sitcom. Unfortunately, the boss's drenched suit and the unfortunate timing of the situation didn't exactly bode well for my future at the company. So, with a mixture of chuckles and apologies, my boss and I agreed that it was time for me to move on. And that, my friends, is how a rogue Roomba and a runaway office chair race led to my most unexpected and comical exit from a job. Who knew that everyday office items could team up to create such a memorable finale? Story 22. I took early retirement to get away from the micromanagement bullying that was endemic throughout the company from the top down. I now work part-time for a lot less money, but somewhere where I'm appreciated and looked after. My mental and physical health has improved beyond measure. Story 23 was being scheduled literally 13 hours a week. Most days I'd come in at 9:30 and leave at 11, brought up to my service manager multiple times. Hey, you only gave me one shift this week. Can't afford daycare with only one shift. He'd say he forgot and sometimes give me a pity shift. Went to the GM, she did nothing. I was tired of doing them the favor of coming into open because they didn't want to, and then not being given any serving shifts in return. Story 24. Used to never understand people when they said, new manager, so I left. Used to think they were overreacting. Last job I quit because new management. Now I understand what they were saying. Story 25. I was convinced I would get a considerable raise to stick around if I turned in my notice. I'd been there nearly 14 years and had a skill set that few could rival. So I applied for a job with some relevant skills to mine, and they offered me an even better position that I applied for. I think I had such confidence and did so well with the interview because I really didn't plan on taking the job. My manager went to bat for me. He understood just how undervalued I was. I gave him a dollar figure to keep me around, and he went to the big bosses with it. They gave a flat-out no. Not even a counteroffer. So now I had to quit because calling my bluff would be rather humiliating. One of the best decisions I've ever made. I'm now earning what I wanted from my old job. I have use of a company vehicle and I'm learning a new trade. I liked a lot of aspects of my old job, but it was stagnant. I wasn't growing at all. Our office is right by my old job and they have a big hiring all positions sign out front. Good luck to them. Story 26. Bullying, or harassment as they call it. I'm autistic and have learning difficulties. Didn't know about the autism at that time. I worked front desk in a doctor's office. One of the nurses who had been there for 20 years always made me out to be so stupid. She would always ask questions that had nothing to do with her just to show people that I didn't know the answer. She would convince the doctors that I was stupid, that I mess everything up. She would say that she has to do all my work for me, that I do nothing. She was just awful. I started calling out sick more. Eventually just left. It was sad because I love the job itself and I typically can't hold a job. I have a hard time knowing when I'm being mistreated. Sometimes I know, but also wonder if it was warranted. Like maybe I'm just as bad or I made them do it. I also never want to get anyone into trouble, even if they deserve it. I never know how to relay information or explain what is happening. So I was stuck. Story 27, a really toxic workplace, but the last straw was when I had to miss a day and work over the weekend night because my dad was having surgery. And my manager accused me of lying. He pulled in HR as a power play as well. He was absolutely delusional because he was new to the position and things were already a crap show. I ended up having an anxiety attack because I just couldn't believe what was happening, on top of my parents' health issues, so I got short-term disability pay for a few months and then quit after Story 28, 2019. They wouldn't allow me to telecommute when an economic opportunity arose for my family, which involved relocating to another state. So I gave them a month's notice to set them up with good faith measure, hoping they'd reciprocate. Heck, I even gave my boss a 3MO notice during one of our one-on-one meetings, and he'd say he'd do what he could do. Well, nothing happened, people were surprised, and I left. They had no true, dedicated replacement and had difficulty, but life went on. We moved to a better home, better community, 10x more freedom, virtually work when the business needs me, which isn't that much, and we made much more money. A nice little treat was that I cashed my 401k when it was high, love that August stock prices, and reinvested when the market was low. Yay, spring. That pushed me over the 1,000,002 marks. What's funny is pandemic hit and they went strict home-based dev until the company folded the division and moved dev overseas for tax reasons. Everyone eventually lost their jobs where I left. Story 29. Got hired to be the lead on an API in a language I'd never worked with before. Ended up having a stroke, came back after a few months, but still couldn't understand the work or the language. So I quit. Mostly because it was demoralizing to come online every day and say I hadn't gotten anything done, but also to give them a chance to move on. I have no animosity toward them, and one of them even acted as a reference for my current job. My ex was super pissed about this because she didn't understand what I was dealing with and just wanted the child support, which they had been pulling out of my wages. She's still angry even today, even though I ended up continuing to pay the support to her. She claims I missed a payment. Wouldn't recommend any of it. I guess my ability to learn new things was wiped out by the stroke, but luckily the stuff I already knew wasn't. So I'm back programming in a more secure public sector job. Story 30. Worked the same position for 10 years to much growth and success. I was the go-to person in my department and made many allies on other teams as well. My boss, who had occupied the position for 22 years, was retiring, and I was a natural fit to be promoted into this very niche, higher-level position, which I very much wanted. Instead, department head downgraded the position, so it would have been a lateral move. When this was happening, I was headhunted at another org. I was offered almost the same position as my old boss, almost doubled my salary, and it took my old company 9 months to fill the position, and had to hire more than one person. And as much as I'm happy and growing at my new role, I'm still sad about how it all went down at my old company, because it was an organization I loved. Story 31. Well, I worked through a contracting agency working for the city school system doing it. My contracting company, ones who employed me, told me that if I ever had an appointment, I had free rein to go. It was in a document they sent as part of onboarding. Well, I've had bad stomach problems for years, and my doc decided I needed an endoscopy. So I told the guy training me, this guy works for the company contracting us the school system, and he said, "Yeah, that's fine, you can leave," and he let the city know. Well, next day Jay come in and I get an email talking about how I'm terminated. What the duck? Apparently they didn't agree with that, so instead of communicating amongst each other or with me, I was just fired. I talked to my company's boss, and he said I can talk to them, but it is what it is. If they decide they don't want you, that's all that can be said. Story 32. They wanted me to send all my private information through Gmail, just in a regular email. No security measures, no contract for pay, nothing. So I started doubting if they were real. Go out to the place where they were located. Owner yells at me and starts cussing me out. I said duck this and walked out. They were super shocked. Story 33. I was unappreciated. My boss would only seem to critique us. Never any appreciation. He'd leave for a weekend vacation and come back complaining about something we didn't do. While we were spending the entire weekend doing something he asked to make sure was done and still helped customers. And one of the days was on the higher end for sales. I also worked there for 3 years and never got a raise. He also asked me to take on more responsibility but never told me specifically how to do that. Story 34. Coworker who enjoyed belittling me about literally everything, going so far as calling me not a man and undeserving of the job because I didn't meet certain criteria and I liked certain things. And a lead who consistently told me I'm being allowed to do what I was doing purely because he talked to the boss and convinced him. Context. It was a smaller machine shop and I was hired as a CNC setup and operator, and that's exactly what I was doing, setting up mill jobs and operating the machine to the completion of said job. According to the lead, I was assigned to the bandsaw. Yeah, no. Finally, I got sick of it and went to work for another shop they all talked crap about. It turns out I'm way happier here than there. I'm making almost $2 more an hour and guaranteed 10 HRs or more overtime a week if I want to work it. It's not mandatory. Story 35. 40-hour job turned into a mandatory OT of 60 hours. Also, every other department got veterans day off and paid for except for the one ducking veteran in the company. Just a crap company on so many levels. Though we had a dept, it seemed he wasn't really in charge. Random family members of the owner would come and give conflicting directions and priorities and would cause massive amounts of problems. Just simply a poor-run company. Story 36. Complete chaos in the IT department. The company had a super tight budget and everyone from bottom to top was stressed out because not enough personnel was hired to meet the goals of the C-suite. Basically, you get paid below market to do the work of 4 employees. And this wasn't a startup, it was a company that has been in business for decades. Ended up finding a role that paid double for less work. Bottom line, if you are overworked and underpaid, look for a new job ASAP. It can potentially take a long time, but it's always worth it. Story 37. I was burning myself out and losing my mind when they brought in a new system, and what would have taken me 5 minutes to do on the old system now took me an hour. Department was understaffed, and when I asked to get more help, they refused. Needless to say, I left and they hired 7 people to replace me. Story 38. Had a Zoom meeting in which I was told that my department's work was eventually going to be outsourced to India. They said it could be 6 months from now, it could be a year, it could be 2 years, and offered me a buyout if I didn't want to wait, so I jumped. Story 39. Truck. My area manager tried to change my shift after I'd already been at work for 2 hours and drove an hour to get there. I got there at 6 a.m., he called and said I needed to leave and come back to work 10 to 6. I told him I'm not doing that. Then he decides to cop an attitude and get sassy and say, well, you can just go home and not come back, among other things. So I asked him who TF off he thought he was talking to. Like that. Needless to say, HR and the district manager, who was a terrible person and has since been replaced, called me an hour later. I was glad to be out of there. Story 40. Duck them kids. Teaching has turned into behavior management daycare. It sucks the joy out of you all day, and then the parents are calling to suck out some more joy. A select handful of kids are incredible and fantastic. So many kids won't turn anything in as in earning a literal 0 for the semester. While all of this is going on, you'll have admin in the network telling you the kids are failing because you didn't set them up for success. You didn't invent a new wheel. You didn't take enough data. You didn't love them into behaving better. Story 41. I was stalked and offered a fantastic pay for a job I dreamed of. Only catch was that I had to TC with another person. Other person didn't think she needed help, so she made it impossible for me to learn the job, to do the job, and to grow in the job. I left after 8 months of getting nowhere at all. I gave my resignation, a 3-page detailed account of everything that lady did to stop me from learning and doing my job effectively. Lady was fired based on my account. Her abuse had been recorded. I WF'd in a very cushy job with a great pay now, so not complaining. When one door closes, Story 42. Toxic leader in a peer department. Used extortion, fear, and blackmail regularly. His team couldn't hold talent longer than a few months due to him. Leadership refused to address the issue. Rumors that he had dirt on the company. So he effectively got everything he wanted when it counted. I left when he went after my team, and leadership allowed him to. Turns out it was the best decision of my professional life because at the same time this was happening, I was offered my dream job, making more money, working fewer hours, and over a year in, I can report no workplace drama here. Story 43. I quit for several reasons. Micromanaging and condescending supervisor. The workload was too much with unrealistic deadlines and so much brain fatigue and stress trying to multitask and work fast, low pay for the type of job it was, and the expensive city I live in, increasing workload with no additional pay. Catty colleagues. Story 44. An acquaintance became dangerously obsessed with me during a psychotic episode, a behavior confirmed by several mutual friends as something he's done in the past. And I took a leave of absence from my employer because I was afraid that he was going to commit an act of mass violence in my workplace. I just started a new job yesterday after several months of being unable to leave my home without panicking. I've changed my appearance so dramatically, even close friends have had to make a double take. And I go by a different name, but I'm still afraid he'll find me and try to hurt me. Story 45. They wanted me to stop reporting releases to the environment in order to reduce the number of environmental reports we had in order to be more appealing to prospective purchasers. Turned into a fun time of retaliation and destroying my mental health until I called it quits. Even got fired. Spoke with several lawyers. All said we have an open and shut case if we were anywhere other than where the company was located. All of them said a judge would just toss the case in favor of the company there. Gotta love the South. Story 46. The head dental assistant had turned into a micromanaging nightmare, causing a lot of toxic stress and anxiety. Couldn't take it anymore. Gave 2 weeks notice by surprise and caught the boss and her off guard. Been gone almost a year and I still shake my head. Why did I stay so long? Story 47. Both my office mates were crying at their desks due to stress when I received a message from my boss that I was working too slow and was no longer allowed to wear headphones at my desk. That was the last straw. I took a break, ran it by my partner, and submitted my 2-week notice. They told me I could just finish out the day. Now I run my very own doggy daycare and couldn't be happier and less stressed. Don't put up with it, people. Story 48. I was canned because I was seriously underperforming. I'd had COVID, so I was dog-tired all the time. That was the truthful justification I gave for my underperformance. And they allowed me to claim unemployment. There was an element of severe demoralization there too, though. I felt bad because my boss was excellent and my team were good, and my underperformance screwed them over. But we were repeatedly just absolutely hung out to dry by other departments and completely dunked on by clients to an alarming and utterly unacceptable extent, and my brain just broke. Story 49. Within 6 months of joining, I got an on-site opportunity. Department head said he can't risk sending a female junior abroad all by herself. I let this slide. A month later, the on-site consultant requested for me to be present there because he wanted to come back, and I kind of knew my way around things. Boo, head calls for a meeting, and this effing arsehole came up with reasons to not let me go. He wanted to send his colleagues instead. I knew this was it. Sent my resignation the next day. Story 50. My boss was an idiot. It's been 9 years. Sometimes when I'm going through a low time or feeling a lot of self-doubt, I take a moment to remind myself, at least I'm not Leo. Now get up and shine out of sheer spite, if nothing else. When in doubt about a leadership decision, I ask myself, what would Leo do? And then do the exact opposite. This has never yet steered me wrong. Story 51. WFH was driving me up a wall. I'm a bit of a homebody anyway, so when I went WFH and didn't alter the rest of my life, after a while, it got too isolating. When I realized that and evaluated what needed to change, I determined it was my job. Turns out I need to see people, even the general public, which I don't generally care for, in order to feel okay doing my own thing and fitting in friends a few times per month. Story 52. I got seriously ill from surgical complications and 2 months into my medical leave, when I was still in the middle of very involved and costly treatment, the company yanked my health insurance out from under me. I had to quit so I could qualify for Medicaid because I have to have health insurance. I'm very sad about it because I loved the job and fought to keep it, but yeah, they didn't give a single duck. Story 53. Got hired on, oh yeah, we'll let you implement a bunch of changes to make the system more stable and work on the DBA side of things. In actuality, please make these reports for a washed-up programmer we unwisely made into a VP. They'll give you pseudo code that doesn't resolve to any data on our system, obey any form of logic, and they'll hire friends from church to be business analysts to muck up specs for major projects that literally do not make any sense. Story 54. I was a teacher. My vice principal yelled in my face in front of a student. A combination of other factors had built up over time and made me hate teaching, but that was the straw that broke my back at that place. After that, I walked down to the principal's office and told him I intended to resign. Right now, I'm in the process of changing careers, but I'm far happier than I was as a teacher. I'm glad I left when I did. Story 55. FTC rule changes collapsed revenue. 3 monthly meetings where finance presented 30% decline. My coworker, now wife, and I were the first ones to jump ship. The company shuttered 6 months later. Story 56. I worked in a special ed preschool. We were short-staffed, and anytime we mentioned the dangers we were facing, the principal dismissed it. She even had the nerve to tell us that everyone's suffering. We had 20 more children, 16 of them had special needs, and many of them were not potty trained yet. But we only had 2 adults. I was not being paid enough to deal with that, so I left for a better paying job. Story 57. Chronic illness gave me no choice. I had become unable to do the detail work needed with any kind of reliable pace. I loved the job. I just couldn't do it fast enough anymore to be of any use. Story 58. My father was hired in the same company. When on working sites, he talked to me like his kid and spoke to other people about me like I was still a child. It ruined every single relationship I had with other workers. I was looked on as a child when I was 20 years old. All respect from the boss was down the drain, and I just had no voice anymore. I had to go. Father of the Year, Story 59. Show up to last contract. Oh, by the way, here's the extra duties list. Oh, by the way, you're in this presentation. Learn all this, do this, plus a myriad of other stupid crap that seemed dumb for someone my age to be doing. After resigning, they said, I'm welcome back whenever. Just a useless, decent-paying job I hated. Story 60, there is no set schedule. Every week, the schedule would change at least 3 times, and you had to work the newest schedule. I had hours from 7 to 13 hours. Turnover shifts, no breaks. Legal in that field, no benefits at all. I could work mornings, afternoons, or nights. I couldn't have a life, and I was burnt out. Story 61. They made me return to office. I managed an entirely remote team. Every single one of us worked in a different country. So did my manager. So did his manager. But they wanted me back in the office so I could host our 7 a.m. team meetings from an empty conference room. My manager left, and as soon as a spot opened up at his new company, he brought me along. Now I work fully remote at a completely distributed company. Story 62. I got laid off by the recent tech bubble. I had an office on the 28th floor in an Amazon corporate building right next to the Spheres in Seattle. I'll miss that office. Story 63. I had a great boss, and when she got promoted up, I promised her that I would train her replacement and then retire early. It was really difficult training her replacement because he was nowhere near as capable of handling a high-level, high-stress job as she was. I was never able to completely train him after 6 months. So one morning I called in sick and said, tomorrow, I'm quitting my ducking job. So I did. Story 64. So it was a few weeks of contractor work at a steel factory. It was all right, but the next contract would have involved scraping the inside of blast furnaces that were still so hot, you needed to keep moving in order to avoid your shoes melting. And when I heard that, I decided to not continue. Most of the crap I did was shoveling Vaseline, which wasn't that great, but still acceptable. Story 65. My boss took me out to lunch to tell me that I'm autistic and need to get tested. I need to find a new career path because it's clear I won't be able to do my job my entire life. I'm making way too much effort to appear normal, and other stuff I'm forgetting. She was completely befuddled when I gave her my notice days later. Story 66. Was overworked, long hours, 12 unless the most days, and honestly, wasn't trained that well when getting prepped. When I asked for help or maybe a slight change in path with the gig, my boss goes, "What a small little man," and fired me on the spot. Hollywood sucks. My current job is a billion times better with way better people running things. Story 67. My job switched from W-2 to 1099. At the same time, my son was diagnosed with autism, and I went from making a decent paycheck to $30 a week from not only all the time I was missing, but also because of crappy overall pay. Company wanted us to work 12-hour days, but didn't want to pay us for 12-hour days. Story 68. 25 to 30% travel for $35K. Too much responsibility for not enough money. I turned down a job several years back that was traveling 4 days a week, 50 weeks a year for $45K, both domestic and international. Not so much as turned it down, but I actually laughed her at the interviewer when she said that. I told her for that travel my minimum salary would be $85K. She sounded genuinely shocked. Story 69. They sell snake oil to little old ladies and I couldn't do it anymore. I thought about all those grandmothers being taken advantage of and I felt so dirty. I up and left in the middle of a shift. Story 70. When I was single, I made the mistake of having sex with someone who would eventually become my coworker. She told everyone very private things about me. And when I went to management about if they just shrugged. When I told them I was going to escalate for HR, they told me they would handle it and it was a joke. Story 71. My foreman air humped my head from a ladder while I was bracing the pipe. I left early and he texted me. He doesn't need me at the job the next day. Next day, call super and find out they don't have work for me. I guess I should learn how to tell on people. Story 72. The company I was working for lost a big contract, so they offered voluntary redundancy packages. After working there for 12 years, I took the redundancy and the huge pay packet that came with it. I had a new job within 3 weeks. That happened 2 years ago, and I'm still with the new company. Story 73. I actually really liked most of my last job, but I was literally doing the jobs of 3 people, and the stress was killing me. It also didn't offer dependent benefits, so when I found a government job with benefits, I leapt for it. Story 74. Manager had a grudge against me because she knew my family member prior to me getting the job and didn't reveal that information to me until after I signed on. Spent 3 months making my life a daily hell as a way to get back at that person through me. So I walked in and quit. Story 75. I was baking bread at Texas Roadhouse. I'm a baker by trade that was in between jobs and it made me hate baking. So glad I quit because now I'm working on becoming a pastry chef, working under some incredibly talented folks. I couldn't ask for better chefs or a less toxic kitchen to work in. Story 76. Drama. Love that job too, but in the end, I was no longer welcomed in the friend group because a woman destroyed my reputation, butting into a situation that was none of her business. I wish I did things differently, but in the end, I learned a lot from that situation. Story 77. While on maternity leave, the cost of living went up so much that returning to work would lose us money. So basically forced to quit and be a stay-at-home mom. Not that I had a choice, but I'm happy. Story 78. I was working the Ohio election today and got the notice on my watch while helping a voter that I was one of the software engineers who had been laid off, 10% of the company in total. 3 hours later, they posted that their EPS was 30% higher than expected. Story 79. The ground just kept shifting under my feet. They wanted to keep me and find the perfect fit, but they just kept bouncing me around. There came up an option of a severance or to be moved. I took the severance and ran. About 8 years of my life wasted there. Story 80. The company restructured, and I had a new boss with a dotted line to the old boss who couldn't let go. Both big egos who wanted everything done now and who refused to communicate to each other. I walked out without notice and didn't look back. Have you ever quit a job after the first day? What made you quit? Story 1. Probably not as bad as most, but for me, it was pretty ducking heinous. Just turned 16, got my first job at the only place in my small farming town, McDonald's. Of course, teenagers always get the worst shifts. Gits only had me working from 4 a.m., 7 a.m. Saturday and Sunday. That's it. Ducking hours a week, with occasional shifts possible in the evenings throughout the week, if someone called off. But hey, money is money, and to a teenager, a few dollars is a lot. So I said sure. Anyway, my first day, I get in there 4 a.m. to help open the place. The night shift that closed the night before had taken the grease traps on the side of the giant grill and dumped them into this giant 55-gallon trash bag on top of all the spoiled, dropped, bad food. My first task? To empty that ducking trash can. I thought, sure, no problem. How hard could it be to empty the trash? As soon as I laid hands on the rims of the trash can, which was on wheels, I knew I was ducked. It was just covered in nasty-ass grease. That yucky WTF, did I just touch crap? But whatever I thought, I'll just wash my hands after. So I start trying to lift this thing, and it is so ducking heavy. Immediately the bag starts tearing, and you can hear the grease sloshing around in there underneath all the garbage. Which BTW, it was ducking foul. It smelled like crap mixed in more older crap. I stopped and told the manager, like, hey, this is gonna make a hell of a mess. And it's so heavy, I don't think I can lift it. Keep in mind, I was offensive line in football all through high school, where weightlifting was a regular thing for me. The manager, this little stick figure of a douche named Joey, really some young 20-something guy who had been working at McDonald's since he was 16 too and finally got a manager's position. You know, the lifers at McDonald's. He's like, you can't empty a garbage can? How worthless are you? I stammered for a second, like, what the duck did you just say to me? Before I had time to open my mouth and get myself fired for telling him to duck off and die, he's like, fine, I'll help you with it since you're so worthless. Then he started trying to lift it himself. Of course he had no luck, and ripped the bag even more. By now, grease is starting to splash out here and there. He didn't think it was that heavy. He thought the bag was just stuck to the sides. And because the thing was on wheels, he was like, well, don't just stand there, come over here and help, stupid. Trying to be helpful, I walk over and help start trying to lift this bag. Of course, the small douche tried to push the thing back and forth, thinking it was stuck, as we got it about halfway out, which made the worst happen. Immediately, the bag ripped open, spewing forth day-old hamburger grease everywhere, which of course the manager shoved the whole thing that's on wheels forward, which because the bag was halfway out and me lifting the bulk of the weight, it tipped over and exploded all over me. And not just exploded either, it flooded the entire cooking area. Grease poured down my chest, pants, shoes, all over the floor, and it was so thick, ducked up, and was grease, it immediately clogged all the floor drains and just kept on going. It spilled all the way from the back in the dishwashing area, all the way up past the cash registers, into the customer dining room. And worse, I thought it smelled bad in the bag. But that crap was positively foul in the worst way. Once it hit the air, and being covered, soaked in that crap, immediately made me throw up. But not no avail, because there was no escaping the stench that now completely covered me. I puked and gagged for over 5 minutes, where I started to walk out front and to stand outside, where the manager told me I wasn't allowed to go. Store policy, they don't unlock the doors until they open, prevents robberies. I said, grease squishing in my shoes, making that ducked up soppy sound, I duck and quit. Let me the duck out of here. He was like, if you leave, you can't ever come back. I told him, half gagging, like I ever ducking would, duck you. Then I left, and that was first and last day I ever worked at McDonald's. It took years for me to even be able to eat from a McDonald's, and even now, it still makes me a little squeamish. When I do eat there, I don't eat any of their ducking beef. You couldn't pay me to eat that crap, gag. Seriously, even now writing this, that was over 10 years ago. Duck McDonald's, story 2. I went to work for a cake company as a decorator. It was an okay job, but a step down for me. I had been a sous chef at a very nice cafe, and cakes had been my specialty. We ran a tight ship. Everything was spotless and sanitized at the end of each shift, and there was an immense amount of care taken with each and every item we produced. My husband and I decided to leave New York to be closer to my family, and we were both feeling so burned out that we needed a change. So I took this job as a decorator and was looking forward to letting someone else run the show. My first and only day started with a big stack of holiday orders, which were easy, but I kept finding old bags of buttercream lying around. They were crusty and had a distinct blue cheese smell, so they were very old. Not just a day or two, probably weeks. That really skeeved me out because the other decorator was using them. I stopped her and took them away and told her to make new buttercream. Then, I noticed no one was washing dishes. Oh, the dishwater is cold, gray, and covered in a nasty film. Gross. The whole sink area is disgusting. So I clean everything up and change out the old water for new hot soapy water and start doing my dishes. An older lady comes by and throws her dirty bowl and a big-ass knife into the sink. She didn't drop them in. She threw them, and she managed to hit my hand in the process. Duck. This Karen doesn't even apologize. I'm trying to be polite because it's my first day, but I'm pretty grossed out and pissed off by this point. So I go to the first aid kit and I'm shooting her dirty looks for cutting me when I open the kit and there's nothing inside. God damn it. I had to go to my car and use my personal kit to bandage my hand. When I came back, the manager had me go get some stuff from the fridge for him. In the process of looking for his crap, I realized there is food all over the floor that has started to mold. There are unlabeled containers of food and several have become science experiments. At this point, I've had enough. I load up a cart with all the rotten, moldy, and dried up stuff and take it out to get rid of it. The manager starts giving me crap for wasting time. He tells me to leave it and says he will take care of it. Fine. I'm told to start baking cakes. I was hired with the explicit understanding that I was a decorator, and there were 5 other employees there to bake. I don't love the baking side and still had decorating to do, but I made the stupid batch of cake and let them cool so I can go back to decorating. The manager gets pissed and tells me to wrap them and put them in the fridge. I explain that they need to cool or they get sticky from the condensation. He doesn't give a duck and makes another girl do it. This explains why all the cakes he's been decorating that day had been wet and crumbly. I'm so pissed at this point that I just want to go home. I finish my decorating and clean my area. I go to the cooler to check on the labels for my cakes for the next day when I find all the disgusting food had been put back in the fridge. Then I walk out to find the manager and I'm looking around and all I can see is filth. Everything is dirty. The cords on mixers are crusty and sticky. There's dried up crap under all the door and cabinet handles. The floors are foul and everyone went home. I hadn't heard them leave, but they all booked out of there, leaving dirty dishes lying around and piled in the sink. They left it filthy, like that day in and day out. The manager didn't care. The owners didn't care. The employees sure as duck didn't care. So I remember standing there in the middle of this bakery apocalypse scene and thinking, no, duck this. I don't want to work like this. No ducking way. They could kill someone with their food. So I called the owner and explained. She kept defending her employees and manager, which made it abundantly clear she was in denial. I quit over the phone and said I wasn't coming back for day 2. She got really mad and told me I was unprofessional and a liar. It was ugly. Now I run a small cake company of my own, and I am so happy I never went back to that hellhole. I'm doing pretty well with my cakes and starting a Brownie of the Month service next month. Story 3. This story still pisses me off to this day. Just moved to a new city on a friend's couch, and I needed a job. My friend is with this small church and suggested I attend a job fair with them. Although I am not part of that religion, I figured I would give it a try. Got up early and put on my nicest suit. I hitched a ride for my friend and had a fresh resume ready. I get there and it's a trailer with no AC. In the middle of summer in Houston, Texas. I had just moved from a reputable position in NYC and was looking to moving my career upwards. There were about 6 other people there, all dressed extremely casually. The one person looking to hire interviewed me in a side room and asked me some BS stories about my qualifications. Turns out this job is cleaning windows. Sounded simple enough. I accepted and went home with hope. The next day I got a ride from my friend at 5 a.m. to meet this guy. He refused to pick me up, fair enough. Wasn't his responsibility. And then we drive to this house an hour south of Houston. While this dude is driving, he is texting constantly and swerving all over the road. I didn't say anything because it was my first day and I didn't know this guy. He tells me on the way there that I was the first white person he ever hired, or a citizen for that matter. Okay, TMI. Well, we get to this suburb and there's a 2-story house that we have to work on. He tells me that we need to build the ladder. Turns out the ladder's in segments and you have to balance each segment and lift them straight into the air. Then get the longer ladder and launch that into the air while balancing them and put that onto the next ladder segment. I tried it on my own after watching him do it a few times, and it sucked. They kept falling over, whatever, I would figure it out eventually. The next step was to climb up this rickety ladder with a pressure washer and blast the side of this house. Then he said I needed to get on top of this house and blast the tiles. This roof was about a 45-degree angle, and it was a long drop. After the tiles were wet, they were incredibly slippery. Luckily, I didn't fall off, but I slipped 2 times trying not to fall. Eventually, I got down and we packed up after 8 hours of work. I was starving, and it turns out this dude brought sandwiches, 2, for himself. He said, "Oh, sorry, you don't have any food? Bring some next time." Thanks for telling me first, a hole. At least I had water from the hose to drink. Anyways, the day was pretty much done, so he drove to a random gas station and let me off. I was soaked in sweat, sunburned, and starving. But I needed the job and decided to hold it out for another day to see if it got better. It didn't. I was smart enough to bring lunch, but the next day was a nightmare. We had to clean an entire empty dorm building while the students were away for summer. It was huge. We didn't get done until 10 p.m. that night. We got there at 8 a.m. When packing up the truck, the dude left his ladder leaned against his truck and accidentally drove over a segment of it. He freaked out. He started to blame me and said I left it out and I would have to pay for it. I just kept my mouth shut because I needed a ride back to civilization. My friend who let me stay on his couch was awesome BTW and happily drove me home from my new random spot the dude left me at. The next day, I texted the dude and told him it wasn't working out. He was immature and a jackass, and I can't really remember how the conversation went, but after 2 days of hell, I was so relieved to be done. The next day, my friend took me out to the movies, and in the middle of the movie, my phone was going off. It was on vibrate. I went to the lobby and I had a dozen missed calls from that dude in text, demanding I return what I stole from him. I called and asked what was going on, and the dude was pretty much screaming and saying I stole his power drill, which is pretty retarded because he left me empty-handed at a gas station both nights, and there was no way I could have stolen anything from him. He eventually hung up and called my friend, he got the number through the church, and demanded that he search through my belongings for his drill, which was in a huge case BTW. My friend obliged, and he found nothing, of course. Well, Friday comes along, and this dude is ignoring my messages and calls about pay. So I drove to the IRS office and called him from the office. He responded right away and said fine, that he would pay the next day in a parking lot at an abandoned mall. We both get there and I walked over to the truck. The dude rolled the window down a crack, threw a wad of cash on the ground and peeled off. Turns out the money was only half what he owed me for the 2 days, but after that I didn't want anything to do with him. So I dropped it. Anyways, years later now and everything is all gravy. Oh yeah, forgot to say, I was hired because the last employee fell off a roof and broke his arm. Story 4. I had recently gotten fired from a job as a radio DJ, my all-consuming lifelong passion. At the time, I happened to live in Las Vegas, a town where few high school graduates bother going to college because they can easily make $50,000 a year, fresh out of school, either parking cars or serving drinks or counting to 21 all day long. So, despite having no connection to nor fondness for the ubiquitous gambling industry, I sucked it up and went to dealer school, knowing it'd make me more employable than my own college degree ever did. Dealer school involved 6 weeks of learning the finer points of craps, after which they guaranteed you a job. What I didn't know at the time was that the school, which had a very generic name, was in fact owned and operated by a local casino mogul. Once you graduated, they'd start you out at one of his so-called break-in houses, 2 decrepit casinos in the heart of Vegas's rotting downtown core. If you were still on the job a few weeks later, you'd advance to one of the middle properties, and then after a year or so, you could work at one of his relatively nice but still less than opulent signature casinos. I certainly had no plans on remaining a dealer for a year, nor on staying at the school for 6 weeks. Fortunately, I was a fast learner, and/or my classmates were dumb, whichever, and managed to complete the course in 3 weeks. I got my assignment at the filthier of the 2 break-in houses. They put me at a 25C minimum bet table. 4 hours into my first shift, there are maybe 20 players at the table, every last one of whom smoked, including the lady with the tracheotomy hole and another dude carrying his own oxygen. There's a particular bet in craps. I forget what it is, seeing as I haven't been at a craps table since and can't be bothered to look it up now. That pays 7 to 6. I brain cramped and mistakenly thought it paid 7 to 5. The one whale at the table, the guy playing entire dollars instead of just quarters, wins his $6.25 bet. I take $7 worth of chips and push them towards him. The pit boss sitting across from me takes his croupier stick and whacks me on the fingers hard. He looks at me and screams in his Alabamian patois, and I remember this verbatim. "You don't pay the man $9, you stupid son of a Karen. You pay him $7.50. What the duck is wrong with you?" Note, there was a widespread local rumor at the time, not since debunked, which held that pit bosses in the employ of this casino received a $1 million bonus after 20 years on the job. Sounds good on the surface, but A, how much is $1 million going to be worth 20 years from now? And 2, if you just got a slightly higher paying job and invested even moderately well, you'd have the $1 million anyway, without doing something so agonizingly repetitive and depressing. Well, at some point, the typical pit boss at this casino wakes up and says, "Jesus Christ, I'm 3 years in. I have to hang on for 17 more soul-crushing years to collect that bonus." Regardless, you can imagine what disdain the pit bosses had for the dealers, absolutely none of whom were going to be there for more than a month or so. They're either going to advance and move on to somewhere better, leaving the pit bosses behind, or drop out. So I took stock of the situation. The pit boss who just administered corporal punishment to me, the player who thinks I just tried to screw him out of $1.50, the old lady who's now next in line to roll and who's screaming at me to give her the dice. I thought, you know what? Best case scenario, if everything works out perfectly, I still have to come back to this minimum wage job tomorrow. So I removed my bow tie, my little apron, and my name tag. I turned to the pit boss and quietly said, "Duck you, you fat little redneck," and walked toward the parking lot. They did not send security after me, which leads me to believe that I wasn't the first rookie dealer to quit in the middle of a shift. Epilogue. I ended up getting another job and didn't think twice about my brief foray into the exciting and glamorous world of craps dealing until I got a letter a few weeks later informing me that my $32.25 paycheck was waiting for me. And no, they wouldn't mail it to me. I had to pick it up. So I park outside the casino and run upstairs to Human Resources, where I have to receive my check from and do an exit interview with none other than the octogenarian mogul who owns the casino, and who couldn't have been nicer to me. I was feeling sheepish and a little embarrassed as he kept talking to me, asking me why I didn't stick it out after showing such promise and breezing through dealer school. Whatever. Finally, he says, "Well, son, I'm sorry it didn't work out. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Mogul." I grabbed my check and raced downstairs, only to see a $20 parking ticket on my windshield. Net profit to me, $12.25 in story 5. I got a job working on the bins, going around in the truck picking up trash around town. On my first day, I was assigned to my crew, who turned out to all be ducking marathon runners who used the job to train. The driver would drive around town, never stopping, and the crew would run alongside nonstop for 8 ducking hours, throwing the trash in as we went. I'm a big guy. I'm not designed to run for 8 hours. I almost died about 10 times. Fantastic guys, top blokes, but sod that. I made my excuses at the end of the shift and never went back and got some contract work at a factory instead the next day. Story 6. Worked 2 days at a car wash. Day 2, saw a customer hand the manager a tip for the guy who had just finished cleaning the interior. The guy who had cleaned it went inside for a drink of water as the customer was taking a second. Anyways, the manager pocketed the tip and told the employee that he got stiffed. Told my new coworker, told the manager I changed my mind about working there and never went back. Story 7. I got a job in the kitchen of an Asian restaurant about a year and a half back. I'll preface this by saying I'm not averse to hard work. I actually like working hard as it makes the day go faster. I'm also not especially choosy about my work. I've worked in some god-awful factories. Anyway, I roll up first night and the small cramped kitchen is busy. I was told my shifts would start at 6 and go on until midnight, but on my first day, come in at 4 so I can be shown the place. For this reason, I didn't eat dinner as I thought I would be shown the ropes, break for dinner, then get into it. Nope, straight into the job. I was with one other kitchen hand. Then there was a bunch of chefs. I say chefs, not like you imagine on TV. They were all wearing wife beaters and looked like they had just come in from skateboarding all day. Didn't matter though, I was put to preparing crabs. I was fine with that and got to it, then peeling fat off a massive bit of beef. Once that was done, it was washing dishes. I actually liked doing that. The pace was so manic that the time flew by. Next, I had to dice this fruit I'd never seen before. The thing they had to do, it was falling apart. I'd never used one before. So the one chef showed me and I got to it. Halfway through the thing came apart and I hit my finger. I was berated. Not for breaking the stupid thing, but for bleeding, which meant I couldn't carry on doing that. No biggie, fair enough. So I was sent out the back, basically, to prep herbs and stuff and put it on ice. I was so hungry at this point, I asked the other kitchen hand. As she seemed nice, what time we had break, she told me we didn't get a break until the shift was over. It was 9 p.m., so I thought I could stick it out for another 3 hours. I ended up being so hungry I was eating ice cubes with mint on them. Anyway, service finished at about 11, and I was asked to come and help with the cleanup. This was the final nail in the coffin for me. The kitchen was obviously a complete state. The 5 chefs walked past me as I went in, then sat at the bar and started drinking. I asked the other kitchen hand if they were going to help with cleanup, and she smiled and said, no, that was our job. It took 2.5 hours to clean that kitchen. I hadn't eaten for about 14 hours at this point, and I was getting really annoyed. See, whatever job I've worked in the past, from factories to farms, and even the labs I've worked in, everyone pitches in. In most jobs I've done, there's a sense of, well, this isn't my job, but if we all pitch in, it would make everyone's lives easier. For this reason, my lab manager once helped us unclog drains. But these chefs sat at the bar drinking and laughing and still getting paid. While 2 of us worked our arses off to clean the kitchen, with their help, it would have been done in half an hour. I think for me, it's more about who I work with and what job I'm doing, so that was it for me. I told the manager I wouldn't come back and I would like my one night's pay. He didn't care because there's no shortage of people needing jobs like that. I had another job at the time as a furniture removalist, so I didn't really care. It was just extra cash. Story 8, Target. First day, they made a bunch of us sign a temp/seasonal employee form, despite originally being hired as a part-time grocer during the actual interview process. On my very first day, there was little to no training, and what training consisted of was putting food items on shelves. That was it. A customer asked, where the diapers? Where? I explained I didn't know because it's my first day, but I'll gladly walk with them in finding the diapers. They were really appreciative of that. A manage finds me asked, what am I doing out of my zone? I tell them I was helping a customer. They throw a fit that I was out of my zone and hand me a dead walkie-talkie that I didn't know was dead. So I go back to my zone and do my thing. An hour later, a different manager finds me and asks why I'm not answering the walkie-talkie. I tell her, I haven't heard anyone at all. She looks, says it's dead, and that in the future when they ask for backup, I have to go. They tell me where to get a working walkie. While getting my new walkie, the person working the customer service desk says, who the hell are you and why are you back here? I have a name tag and dressed like I work at Target. I shrug it off and get my new walkie. So now I'm at the registers, untrained in their pose and in winging it. Of course, the register they give me has no change, bags, or booklet to look up produce. All while over the walkie, I'm getting Karened at for not stocking the shelves in the grocery department. I shut my light, find a manger to let them know I'm going on break. They say, you're only here for 6 hours. You only get a 15. All right, so I go outside and smoke a much-deserved cigarette. Come back and do my grocery thing. The store closes and my section is done. I somehow got suckered into staying late and putting go-backs into the Tadan department. A different manager says to me, I bet you don't know where anything goes. I say, yeah, first day. He replies with, ha, oh well, and walks away. It's 1 a.m. now, and I'm already like, I'm never ducking coming back here for 7:50. Then I hear that same manager shouting my name. A few minutes later, he tells me I have to leave. I clock off, and yet another manager asks me, why am I clocking off? I let them know one of the other managers told me so. Then this manager tells me, oh yeah, because you never took your break, you're in compliance. You just cost this store $25,500. I'm now off the clock and asking to leave, but they only let employees leave in groups. So I waited around for an extra 30-40 minutes, unpaid just to leave. I've worked many jobs and in different fields. That and lifeguarding at a resort were the worst. It was an odd summer. Story 9. They lied to me about what I was doing. I was told I would be given an office. Instead, I was put in a closet with 6 interns. They did not have enough equipment for me, so I had to share a computer with someone else. It was a computer-related job. Story 10. At the beginning of my culinary career, I got a job at an old Hilton restaurant. Throughout the shift, I was asked to clean out some of the fridges on the line in the walk-in. These things were filthy. There were stains, mold, and just had the worst stench. I know now that it takes months of negligence to get as bad as these were. They were essentially making me the Karen, since they didn't ever do it. This being my first line cook job, I did what I was told and kept my mouth shut. As the dinner service started, I see lots of red flags of this being a crap hole to work for. Sauces and soups weren't at temp. There were no sanitary buckets and nothing was getting sanitized. Basic procedure was to change the date on product every day rather than throwing it out. Rotten meats were now put in marinades to mask the taste and smell. I could keep going, but the list just goes on and on. I don't know why I put up with everything as long as I did, but what happened next is when I lost it. It was the beginning of service, and the sous chef was marinating chicken, and the line cook made some type of taco dish. After the plate was finished and put in the window, the cook ran to take a piss. The server looked at the plate and tells the sous chef that the line cook didn't put pico on the tacos. Sous chef takes his hands out of the raw chicken container, puts his hands in directly to the pico de gallo, and garnishes the tacos. I immediately tell him I cannot work here. He's dumbfounded and asks why. I say, you're going to get someone sick or worse, yet kill someone someday. No one has ever complained about my food, says the sous, and I'll never forget what I said. That's because they're probably already dead. And I walk out. Poor guy actually thinks he is a chef. Story 11. I worked for a winery in a very touristy part of town. Actually, during the day, it was probably the busiest, most crowded place in the whole town, especially on the weekends. It was the absolute worst. No less than 5 people would come in at a time. And here's the kicker. Each person was entitled to 3 free 1-ounce pours of wine. A lot of the time, that's all people wanted, free wine. But when it got busy, it got really busy. I'm talking about groups of 10 to 20 people coming in, all wanting to try and buy crafty Texas wine. So imagine being assigned to all 10, 20 of these people, not only being responsible for the free wine each person has had, but who's wanting what, suggesting what they might want, and trying to sell them a full glass, or better yet, a bottle of wine, PR2 or 3, that they had been sampling. That's not taking into account the constant running back and forth, trying to help other employees, other people, that you had no idea what they were wanting or anything. Constantly washing the stupid tiny wine glasses for the samples, restocking everything in the correct manner, and finally hoping to ring someone up. By the end of my first day, I was exhausted, on all levels to say thou very least. And I knew the next day was a busy weekend during the summer. We had at least 10 people behind the bar. Everyone in a frenzy, but everyone seemed to be handling very well and professionally. They were casually talking it up with each person as if they knew everyone personally, not me. After about 30 minutes or so, I was on the verge of a complete meltdown. My mind was going blank. I was numb. I could hardly put a sentence together. After a few minutes of this, I pulled my supervisor aside and told him I wasn't feeling well and that I needed to get some air. He let me know that the owner was going to talk to me to make sure I was doing all right. A few minutes later, she approaches me and asks me if everything is okay. I just broke down and said bluntly that it wasn't working out and apologized for not being able to stick it out. Luckily, she was totally cool with it and said that the job isn't for everybody. I felt bad for leaving, but I feel like it wouldn't have been fair for everyone else had I stayed and continued to do a lousy job. Story 12. Quit a job after the first day. It was a construction job run by a student who was flipping houses. He hired a bunch of students randomly. His crew consisted of 4 people that showed up together and were hired previous to me. My first day in, Mr. Flipper said I was to break the floor up a certain distance from the foundation wall with the others in the crew and handed me a sledgehammer. I thought this was the best summer job, paid in cash, and I got to get really strong at the same time. Sign me up. Until I realized there wasn't any safety equipment. So to protect my eyes, I would close them on each swing I would do. The crew were basically pretty slow, and 2 of them would take breaks for 15 minutes at a time every half hour. Still, it was my first day, and I wanted to show good spirit, so I worked hard. I got half the floor done by myself. Mr. Flipper came downstairs, saw his crew, and really complimented the work, and said I was doing great work. He went back up. One of the crew came over after that and said I better slow down, pace myself, or there would be problem. At the end of the day, I went and told Mr. Flipper that the guys on the crew told me to slow down and mentioned I would have problem. Mr. Flipper said there wasn't much he could do as one of the guys was a cousin of his, and he can't fire his cousin and friends. And on that note, I said I wouldn't be showing up the next day. Life's short. I mean, I could have just dogged the job a bit. But morally, I had a problem with that. And being ostracized by everyone I'm working with is just not safe. And then if word gets back, which it would, I would be labeled a snitch. It's a no-win situation. Story 13. Got a job as a kennel attendant at a vet's house in the country. I heard they bred Kerry Blue Terriers and needed help walking and caring for the dogs on their property. Okay, cool. I show up, no dogs are around the house. Other kennel attendants lead me to the basement and turn on the lights. There are literally 50 dogs in regular crates that all go ape crap at the same time. The smell is awful. One of the girls hands me a slip lead and instructs me to start on a row. I'm to leash the dog, walk it out to an outdoor pen that is essentially so small, it's another crate, leave it there while I go clean the piss and crap from the crate, then go back and retrieve the dog to put it back in the crate. No cleaning the mess from the dog, no exercise, no play, no nothing. Moving from one crate to another would be the entire existence of the dogs, unless they were going to be shown, which only like 4 of them ever were, and they just got baths before they left the property. Left that day, never returned any calls or went back ever again, and cried on my way home. Did write crap reviews about the vet all over the place though, making sure people knew who they were dealing with. Story 14. I was 17. I worked at a radio station on the weekends, loved that job. Went to school full-time, US version of uni, and delivered pizzas part-time. My best friend and I went to the shirt factory in our hometown. Seriously, no idea what the name of the company actually was, because we heard if you got a job, you were hooked up more or less for life, as they had a ton of older ladies that had been there for years and years starting to retire and die. First day, we go in, we have several aptitude tests that showed troubleshooting and general aptitude. The HR, I don't really know. Lady told me I had scored higher than anyone ever had and asked if I was certain I wanted to be employed there. I believe it was $8 an hour. This was back in the late 80s, so that was a lot to a 17-year-old. I said, yes, ma'am, I am 100% certain. So my friend and I go off in opposite ways, and I am taken to this ducking beast of a sewing machine, and I'm told that I will be sewing the underarm pieces. For those that don't sew, it is the hardest part of anything you sew, especially on men's dress shirts, as they have to be perfect. You, wearing the button down, look at the seam under your pit. That is pretty complex, and has to be in order for the shirt to hang right. I'm also told I have to work on my own machine and buy my own tools, which were really expensive, to work on said machine. Lunch hour came, and I met up with my friend at the pizza place where we both worked, actually, who had been given the buttonholer job. Buttonholes are super easy, comparatively speaking. I was pretty livid. We ate our pizza, and all I remember is thinking, I really did not need the dollar that badly. The factory was old. I hated the job already. Nobody there seemed to like their jobs, etc. Nope, did not return to the shirt factory after lunch. Worked those 4 hours for free, and so did my friend, because we were honestly too scared to face those people again. Story 15. It was a call center. I was young and was looking for a job. When I applied, one of the staff interviewed me. The job description was very vague, so I asked what my job here exactly would be, and he said that I would call people who get calls from shady call centers which sells subscriptions and stuff. I would then offer to remove them from the calling list nationwide so they never again get those kinds of calls. The staff member then continued to coach me on how to talk and how to calm people and give them confidence. After 1 hour, I started my first calls in a room full of other call agents. Every time you convince someone and check their actual bank account data with the ones in your list for the processing fee plus shipping, you would then forward them to another department who then closes the service. I was very good at it. We mostly called old retired people, the main target of the other shady call centers. Every time you closed a deal, you would then go to a whiteboard with all the names on it and add another point to your name. At the end of the day, I surpassed everyone by far. The boss couldn't believe it and congratulated me. Next day before work begins was talking with another coworker who heard of my score last day and was impressed. I explained to him that I do it with passion. Helping old people to save their money while get paid is wonderful. He laughs at me and explains, every time I forward one of the calls, the connection will be disconnected. Then another department calls them, that sounds like us, and subscribe them for a pricey magazine for a couple of months. It was like I got hit by a truck. I ran to the other department and took their script, and it was all true. My first encounter with bait and switch. Then I ran to the boss and resigned. It's almost 10 years, but I still feel sick on my stomach for all the person I deceived. I want to earn money, but I want honest work. Story 16. Worked as a busboy at a Chinese buffet. Looking back on it, I should have given it another few days, but what's done is done. The management was extremely shady and did some pretty bad stuff, including illegal things. They would make employees work overtime with no pay, and they fired a mother because she asked for time off on a holiday to spend time with her child. Among other things I probably don't know about. The job consisted of doing like 15 different things, which was overwhelming for me at the time, considering this was my first job. I'm a tell me what to do and I'll do it kind of guy, and this job was the complete opposite. Without my friend telling me what to do, I was completely lost. Again, I should have stayed longer and maybe I would have been better at it, but I wasn't. I also had to do some heavy lifting, which involved lifting the huge-ass garbage bag into the trash bin, which my scrawny ass could not do. I also learned that sometimes I would need to be a waiter-server for people, if they were short on some days, which I definitely did not like. The worst thing, however, was that I didn't really need the money and wanted a part-time job. However, this one was 12 hours, 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., 5 days a week. After the first day, I was completely wrecked, and of course I would be working for the next 4 days in a row, one of which was without my friend. I am completely sure I would have been fired on that day, because I had no idea what I was doing. However, though the worst part is that when I called asking for my pay, since I worked 10 hours, I never got a call back from those seedy gits. Pretty sure they just heard my message and laughed, and I didn't ever call back to remind them that it's illegal to work without getting paid. I hope the place shuts down or gets new management. Also, the place was pretty crap. It was like an overpriced version of Mandarin with crappier food. Story 17. I got a job at a fabric store when I was 20. I had just moved back in with my mother after ending a very abusive relationship, so much so that I required lots of medication to keep my anxiety PTSD stabilized. I tried to throw myself out into the world before taking a break, but couldn't. The store manager was harsh, and I was surrounded by people who were at least 30 years older than me with nothing better to do than create drama. I couldn't handle it when someone told me that I must be a complete idiot if I need to be shown how to cut fabric. I was a visual learner, so showing me at least once would have been nice, being my first day and all. So I just said okay, and took off my little cheesy apron and set it on the counter, and walked out after 45 minutes of working. It sounds pitiful, but I had been going through a lot. That's my story. Just an FYI, I finished college, and I'm now married to someone who I can't imagine my life without. Story 18. Slight twist. I interviewed for vector marketing out of college, thinking I was about to hit it big. Day of the interview, when they brought up the knives, I realized where I was. They interviewed us in groups of about 20, and then we had private interviews with 3 other people. What? And they basically asked if we were interested in taking the next step. I said sure, as excitedly as I could. But as soon as he told me to wait in the other room for the next segment, I walked the duck out. I remember walking to my car and looking up at the window to the second-story office, and the manager was giving me a death stare through the blinds like an old dead woman from a 90s horror movie. I just looked away and drove home. Duck those people. I used it as an interview practice and never felt a second of regret for walking out. Story 19. Worked in a cafe as a teenager as a server. On my first day, they threw me into the lunch rush with no training. We also had not done my hiring paperwork, but that's another story. Then they got mad at me because I was too slow and not doing things right. I left after less than 2 hours. I also worked at Walmart for about a month. Not a day, I know. But quit because a guy started stalking me, coming into my department every day, asking my work hours, where I lived, what my phone number was. He followed me home on the bus one day, but there were tons of people around, so I ran home, and luckily he couldn't follow me. Filed a police report, but the Walmart security wouldn't do anything for me. So I quit. Story 20. I worked at a big box electronics store with the signature colors of blue and yellow for 1 day. It was made clear to me during that shift that they didn't care about the employees. I was told during the interview that we would be there until like midnight or 1 a.m. at the latest. While unloading the truck, it got to be about 12:30 and we were only 60-70% done. I asked the other employees and the manager what time we'd be finished, and they said probably closer to 2:30 or 3 a.m. I had class the next morning, and for the rest of the semester at 8 a.m., I just said, I need to leave the store. Can you unlock it and let me out? Manager, why me? Because I'm quitting and want to go home. I have class in a few hours. Manager, oh, okay, I guess. I now work for a different privately owned electronics and appliances store for more money and with much cooler people. Story 21. Quit after spending a day shadowing the guy I was supposed to replace. He was a web design and development instructor at a for-profit college, a company which had recently implemented what they called wheel model enrollment. I had understood this to mean that students could enroll every 2 weeks as convenient for them, and I would have to take students at different points of the class all at once. As a former camp counselor and high school algebra teacher, this did not actually bother me. I was rather used to getting students at all different levels and working on teaching the lot. However, this enrollment model actually meant that students could enroll every 2 weeks as convenient for them, but they'd be dropped into the class wherever the class was. The courses were already broken down into 5 2-week modules that I was required to deliver and assess using the provided assignments and tests. It took me just the one day to realize the problem. It dawned on me somewhere toward the end of the first session that, come Monday, I'd be teaching data validation to students who had never seen the HTML/S guts of a web page before, let alone a more fully featured programming language required for data validation. And these brand new students would have to master all that and 8 days of other topics in the space of 2 weeks. And that just wasn't right. I spent the rest of the day really thinking about it. And the more I did, the angrier I got. I told the president of the college I couldn't do it, that I refused to be a part of setting up their students for failure. He seemed pretty defeated, like this was exactly what all the other bailing instructors told him. But it was decreed by corporate execs that we all had to make this wheel model work. What a scam. Story 22. I worked at a discount warehouse store a few years back. First day, and the boss and managers seemed pretty chill. Cracking jokes, ask if I want to go halves on an abuse charge whenever a hottie walks in ECT. Good times. Halfway through the day, I'm shown restocking. We got to get a trolley to pick up a whole pallet and take it to the aisle to unpack. Here I am given a grave warning. Do not leave the trolleys in the aisles unattended. There's a $5,000 fine per person, and apparently someone's already been charged with this. After a bit of intro, I go get my own trolley and start stocking my aisle. 10 minutes in, there's a call at the register that they need me. I stop unpacking and start taking the trolley back so I can go to the registers. Nope, boss flips his crap. I just heard them call you to the front. Where the duck is, you going? I explained I needed to put the trolley back for safety, he said. Nah, I don't give a crap. Just go to the register. I said I was told I'd get fined if it was left there. He said, well, that's your problem. I put the trolley back anyway and headed to the front while he was eyeballing me. My lunch break was 20 minutes later. I called my fiance to pick me up for lunch. We went home and I never came back again. They tried to call me a few times later that day. I didn't answer. I ran into a coworker from there a few weeks later. They thought something had happened to me. They legit thought I'd been kidnapped or something, but never actually bothered calling the police since they saw no missing persons report. I'm glad I left. Story 23. Last year I got a job which involved me dressing up as a Disney princess for kids' parties. I fit into the costumes fine. On my first day, my boss told me I was just dressing in plain clothes and painting the kids' faces. I asked her why I wasn't dressed up, and she said, you need to lose a bit of weight to look like a realistic Disney princess. You can wear the dresses when you have lost more weight. I never went back. Story 24. I work in a casino. We had a new employee and we were teaching her blackjack, which is probably the simplest game we offer. She quit after the first hour because she didn't think there'd be so much math. Apparently, counting to 21 is hard. Story 25. I was looking for work when I got a call to do server administration and asked if I could start the same week. No problems. Why not? Get to the office. It's pretty much just been moved into. All the desks are third hand, the walls are unpainted, and the conference room for training was small. Oh, and the office itself was an open office design. No cubes or offices. Okay, weird, but okay. Get into the conference room and training has been going on for an hour. Funny, since I was told to show up at 10 a.m. and not 9 a.m. As I sit down, I'm handed a good 3-bar thick D ring binder filled to the brim with medical coding training docs. Okay, so alarm bells are going off all over the place in my head. Sit there, ignore the training because I'm here to maintain servers. Because, that's what I was hired for. Lunchtime comes up, I and another guy asked the trainer, hey, so why are we training to do medical coding when we were hired to do server admin worker? Oh, that's just a small part of the job. Most of the job you'll be doing at medical coding. You are getting paid more to maintain the servers. The other guy and I look at each other, grab the company-provided sandwiches, eat real quick, head out to smoking area with our training docs, and then dumpster the crap. Never look back. This was 17 years ago. Still see ads for the company every now and then. Even got a call once from another recruiter to work for them. Just laughed when she said the name and hung up. Story 26. It was at a pizzeria. I couldn't stand the manager. I had to learn 2 different POS systems because although the newer system could handle cash and card, the manager didn't want to do away with the old system. I got yelled at for not pretending to unlock a display case enough. The cooks and pizza guys gave me crap for not knowing their protocols on my first day in food service. The worst part was the manager's attitude. Around lunchtime, Some guy comes in. He takes a chair, plops it down by the register, and says he's not moving until the Karen comes out and pays him. I call my manager out and she immediately starts making a scene. I have never seen such behavior before. She's picking a fight, physically and verbally, and throwing receipts to the ground. The other cashier, who's been there for 2 weeks, just shrugs. Once the manager pushes this guy out to the street and pays him, she turns to me and says, "He's crazy, always interrupting business." I call her the next day, said I'm not coming back. Story 27. I got a job as a receptionist at a local car body shop. In the first day, I'd somehow earned the nickname lesbian. I'm not butch, and while I'm bisexual, they didn't know that. I was just the only woman working there, and I guess that's how that goes. The owner-manager never gave me a straight answer to anything. Every question I asked was met with a sarcastic answer or an answer that wasn't correct at all because he thought it was funny. I also witnessed a female customer bring her car in, and the manager handed her $20 and told her to go get him some beer. Yeah, the look on her face told me this wasn't acceptable, not something she normally does for him. She attempted to protest, saying she had stuff to do, and said something like, "What better things to do have to do than serve a man?" Yeah, I didn't come back. He actually begged me, via text, to come back. I was like, yeah, no. Story 28. I worked at a Chinese restaurant for one shift. I was 15 and it was my first real job other than paper route or mowing lawns. I bussed tables for about 4 hours. When things finally slowed down, the owner came to me and said, "You punch out now. Clean high chairs and go home." "Okay," I replied and started in on the high chairs with a spray bottle and rag. "No, punch out first, then clean high chairs." Psh, that's not how it works here in America. If I punch out, I'm going home. You know clean high chair, you know come back. Fine, peace out, Mr. Miyagi. I'll be back on Friday to get my check. Story 29. There is a number of potato farms around where I live, and I'd worked the harvest at one of them for a couple seasons when I was about 17. Usually it's a seasonal job that lasts about 6-8 weeks, and you typically work 12-hour days, 7 days a week. You go into it knowing it's going to be tough. Guess I got spoiled at the one farm I worked at, though, because I went to a farm that was closer one year. The workstation, which was a conveyor belt that the potatoes were going by on, and we were supposed to remove any non-potatoes or rotten ones, was set up next to an open field, which meant if it was at all windy, you were eating sand and getting it in your eyes and nose. Okay, whatever. They gave us some goggles, which helped a little. There were also no organized break times. You just took a break when you felt like it, and the supervisor would stare at you like you were doing something wrong until you got back to work. It was also really hot. After a day of that, I told them I wasn't coming back. My younger sister worked for them for 2 days and then quit after they wouldn't send her on a break and she got heat exhaustion. Story 30. I had been wanting to work for the airlines for a while and finally scored a job with an airline that is now no longer in business. I was hired as a ticketing agent. I have worked retail before, so customer service was no problem for me. I went on a 2-week paid training in Atlanta, and it was a blast. Cool people, cool trainers, just an all-around great 2 weeks. I get back and I'm super excited to start my first day. I looked at my schedule and my first day is 11 p.m., 8 a.m. There are no flights at that time, as it was a small airline with only national flights. I figure I'll go in anyway. I go in and I'm told my job will be to supervise the plane cleaners, as they are a contracted out 3-party company. Apparently, there were no more ticketing agent positions available, but they hired and trained me for it anyway. I did not agree to work overnight as I had school during the day, and I certainly did not agree to sit there for 9+ hours and watch people clean a plane. Watch and nothing else. I felt like I was wasting my brain away. An additional fun fact is one of the plane cleaners was my most recent ex who I was still having a hard time getting over. He apparently was just hired to clean planes for the third-party company I was supervising. After one shift, I just blocked all of their numbers and never went back. Story 31. Probably too late to the party, but I got my first job at a Dollarama, got put on an 8-hour shift of never having a job in my life, and 14+ years of gaming / not really lifting a finger. My boss was my neighbor, and I assumed she would be really nice, but her first words when I got there was, "Don't worry, you're going to find out I'm a huge Karen." I was doing stock. The back room had no room for absolutely anything. Things were leaking from the storage into the store itself. And that day we got 8 pallets around 8 feet high and 5 by 5 feet around with only one other guy helping me. I was trying to work as fast as I can. I may be lazy, but when I'm doing something for someone else, I make sure it gets done. So I did a bang-up job struggling to find places to put the new boxes of merchandise in with one other person. Boss told me I was one of the best employees she ever had. I guess I worked too hard for a dollar store. She asked if I could do another 8-hour shift in like 12 hours. I said, sure, I guess. Went home and died, walked back the next day and said, yeah, this isn't for me, sorry. Thankfully, she said okay, and I went home. No harm, no foul. The day I started, a really hot cashier started though. I almost wished I stayed for that. Story 32. In between careers, I worked for a temp agency. They sent me to a recycling plant for a manual labor gig, and the foreman told me to grab a forklift and load a 53 trailer. Perfect, I thought, since I love driving forklifts and am a certified instructor. He shows me the goods, then shows me the trailer, which has a hole in the floor. It's bigger than my fist and almost big enough to put my head in. I tell him that trailer's unsafe. He walks over it, says, "Nah, it's fine." I tell him that the lift can weigh anywhere in the neighborhood of 9,000 pounds plus the load. He doesn't budge, so I tell him, I can't work here and left. Even if I loaded it with a pump jack, there's nothing stopping that trailer from getting worse on the trip, or the receiver not knowing about the condition and getting hurt. No thanks. Story 33. So a much younger me applied for a marketing company that advertised itself online with lines like, a fun work environment with drinks and BBQs on Fridays, with no real description about what the role was. I thought this sounded awesome, so I contacted them and instantly was called in for an interview the same day. I arrive and there's a few other people applying, so we all go in for a group interview and the guy starts talking about how much money you can make still without any mention of what the role was. He finally gets to the end of his overly dramatic presentation, and I asked him what we would actually be doing. He paused for a moment and said it was a business-to-business safety product promotion. What he really meant was, we go around door to door selling fire extinguishers to businesses. We weren't even selling to the business itself. We had to sell to the employees for their own personal use at home, as it's law that all businesses have these on the work site. I was verbally abused so much. At the end of the day, I returned back to headquarters, left all the gear at reception, and just walked out. Story 34. This was just an interview, but it was a doozy. Here's a breakdown of how the entire encounter went. I was looking for a second job to fill in my free time and thought bartending would be fun. Found a job posting, invited for an interview at noon. The bar is shaped like a boat, and it's basically pitch black inside. Immediately harassed by a drunk patron, remember it's noon, who ordered me to undress as part of my interview. Huh? Owner comes downstairs and I feel his eyes all over me. Not a good sign. Tells me I'll make $3.15 an hour. What? Informs me that the uniform is an oversized men's button-up, bikini bottoms, and flats. That's it. Gestures to my chest and says, "Oh, and don't worry if you think you're too small. Sometimes small is better." I'm pretty sure I laughed for a full 15 minutes after fleeing that crap hole. The dude called me at least 3 times after that, trying to get me to accept the job. Story 35. I quit after 3-4 hours on the job at a telemarketing center. I was told that the job was making phone calls to remind citizens to vote. So I figured, sure, I can leave a peppy voicemail and do a service for my country. But what the woman didn't tell me was I was telemarketing for the Republican Party. Now, it wouldn't matter what party I was doing this for. I was not comfortable making phone calls to random people and shoving a political agenda down their throats. People were beyond rude to me on the phone. I'd get cursed at, get remarks, etc. Then your supervisor gets to listen in on your calls to make sure you're doing everything exactly right. I hate fighting with people already, so these calls were difficult to begin with. Then my supervisor would come around the corner and yell at me for not doing a good enough job. I asked if I could step outside to take my birth control with a cup of water, and they told me no. They don't allow breaks, which is illegal in my state at least. After ending another call, I was like, I cannot do this for a job. I stood up and told them thanks, but this isn't for me. I can't handle this. Never regretted that. Story 36. Here's what happened to me. Quit my first great job as a baker, 18 years old, to work at a cafe where I would become an apprentice. The owner, who I'd been talking with for almost a year, promised me double pay, more hours, and is very laid back and easy. Rock up 7 a.m. and first and only job I get was to clean out the storeroom and rearrange the whole thing. I pulled everything out like he said and put everything where he wanted it to be arranged. Once finished, he got the craps and I had to do it again. Second time round, and he got even more pissed off and got me to do it again. 6 years later, he still was not happy with and told me that I'm screwing around and not using my brain. Soon as it was time to go home, I never returned. Not one thing I did on my first day was anything related to what I'm good at, baking. Oh, and he also kept 2 pit bulls out back, where he would grab food from the front and hand feed it to them, where they licked his hands and all, and he would give them hugs/kisses and then return back inside without washing his hands. Story 37. Not on my first day, but I quit after 5 days because the boss was dodgy. Back in my hairdressing days, I started working for a 50-something-year-old woman. She had just bought the salon, and I was one of the first people she poached to come work for her. Anyways, she had no experience running a salon, was not a hairdresser herself. So she offered me a good weekly wage plus commissions. I took the job, started on the Monday, and paid on the Friday. I had a relatively good first week. I had my own clientele, so that helped her massively. She paid my wage, but I noticed she didn't put my commission in, which was worth around $400. So I went to her office and asked why she hadn't put my commission in. That's when she said to me, "If you want it, You have to take it out of the till yourself. I got the feeling she was trying to set me up as the till is under surveillance. So I said no, I would much rather you just put it in with my pay. She refused, and I told her, I am not setting myself up for you to accuse me of stealing down the track, picked up my equipment, and walked out. Story 38. 2 jobs. First was casual catering, bartending, event hosting at a conference center. First shift, I get continuously harassed by 2 guys who can't take no for an answer when it comes to pestering me for a date. They even go as far as to insist on walking me home and snoop the staff records in order to get my number and text me nonstop. Second shift, they start pulling the race card, saying, I'm only saying no because they are black or some crap along those lines. Apparently stalking a girl is acceptable to them. Then, they start saying they'll walk me home again, at which point I snap and I sneak out mid-shift and don't return. Still got paid the full shift, which was a bonus, I guess. Second job is a cold calling sales job. The manager keeps hitting on me and telling me to dump my boyfriend who is also working the same job and is right there. I refused to turn up for another shift. The whole company was skeevy, and they kept trying to con old and vulnerable people into buying crap they didn't need. It was awful. Story 39. It was a horrible marketing job. I was desperate for money, and it was the only job I applied to which called me for an interview. I was to be one of those diglets that stop people in the shops and try to get them to sign up to donate to a variety of charities monthly. It was skeezy as duck. You get $100 per person you sign up. All the big earners had a little routine and knew who to use it on. There was no base pay, and they capped your commission until you filled up some sort of buffer thing, just in case a person canceled before we managed to charge them for the first month. They asked us to focus on the elderly and foreign students because they were the most sympathetic. They taught us a bunch of sleazy techniques like passing the pen for the sign-up sheet towards the person's heart because they would instinctually grab it to protect themselves, and that sort of subconsciously tricked them into thinking they have already accepted sigging up. I worked one day and made no sales and got a call that night from the manager telling me I had better sell hard tomorrow or I'm fired. I told him I quit. Duck that job.